I could say worse than that. Can I just check? My book has a parental advisory. Is swearing allowed?
Yeah, swearing is allowed, though I'm the only one who swears on the podcast, and I try not to do it too badly. Hello and welcome to Pulse Amplify, where we sit down with the leaders and changemakers shaping the future of health. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
Today on Pulse, George and I are thrilled to be joined by another book author. Professor Joe McDonald is not your standard academic. He has spent his life in the trenches of digital health and he's lived to tell the tale. Joe has written about his experiences, observations and reflections for many years, and he's recently published a book entitled FHIR and Loathing in Las Vegas, collected essays on the sociology, anthropology and psychopathology of big IT. This is a really fun read through the modern history of digital health in the UK. And by fun, Joe's writing has many moments of levity and humour. But also, I found it really fun because it's not written as a reflection back over decades, but it's a collection of essays. So it's written at individual moments in time, when at the time of writing, of course, Joe didn't know what the future would hold. He had some really good guesses and a lot of them came true, but he didn't know it at the time of writing. So the book is really fascinating collection, and there are so many lessons to be learned. Indeed, Joe calls it out early. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Joe McDonald, it is so great to have you in the studio. Welcome to Pulse Amplify.
Well, thank you very much for that glowing introduction. It's great to be here, actually. I was in Australia just a few months ago and was greatly encouraged by your IT scene and the Sparks movement. I was lucky enough to spend some time at one of the Spark meetings, and I just thought, oh my God, this is so healthy.
You can always tell a dedicated health informatician when they go to a Sparked meeting when they're on vacation in Australia. So that's a great sign. So it's really great to have you on board, and we're looking forward to some interesting and exciting stories.
Well, it's lovely to meet you, George. I'm probably most infamous for the £3 billion that we wasted on Lorenzo during the national programme for IT. But there you go.
What's that famous saying? One person's waste is another person's income?
Oh, beautiful, George.
Oh, cool.
Beautiful.
I can see I shouldn't have bothered writing any questions because we could easily just chew the fat for the next 5 hours. But anyway, I'm going to try and control this. So, Joe, firstly, could you tell us a bit about yourself? It was a transition from a psychiatrist to a digital health expert and now to an author. And how did this book come about?
Okay, so I'm a psychiatrist by background. I live in Newcastle in the UK, and I was medical director of a large mental health organisation in the northeast of England and got merged with the organisation next door and became deputy medical director. It was the first ever step down in my career, and I thought I'll have to find something else to do here. And there was an advert in the British Medical Journal for National Clinical Lead for IT. And I thought, well, I've got a computer. So I applied and got the job as National Clinical Lead for IT, brackets mental health, the Tony Blair's £12.7 billion national programme for IT, and spent 4 years working for the government, developing electronic patient records for the NHS in mental health. And that went quite well. We managed to digitise all of mental health in the UK on my watch.
And what year was that?
Oh, God. We're talking about maybe 15 years ago, 2010, I guess, to 2014. And my success in the mental health space made them think, oh, he could probably save the problem child of the national programme, Lorenzo, which was a single patient record for 30 million people in the North, Midlands and East. And I went to work on that programme and it didn't go terribly well. In fact, it went really badly and we wasted about £3 billion. And I raised the fact that things weren't going awfully well. They asked me to handwrite a report about the future of Lorenzo. And I handwrote this report so that it couldn't be FOI'd, Freedom of Information or anything. And then I got disappeared. And at the exit interview, my boss told me that I suffered from career-limiting frankness. And I was let go from the program. And then after that, I started to write a column for a magazine called eHealth Insider, which turned into Digital Health at the behest of John Herxman, the editor. And that column turned into the book. So that's the story.
Beautiful. Thank you.
It is interesting, the meandering way we end up in a digital health career. So very few of us planned to get there. So a massive theme of your writing is too big to fail. Now, we've heard about too big to fail in other industries, but can you tell us what we mean by too big in digital health and why your experience shows that failure is almost inevitable?
The fact of the matter is that if you throw $1 billion or $2 billion at an IT project, it will almost certainly fail, but it will fail fairly slowly. Once you've sunk that much cost, it's very difficult for a government to say, oh, okay, that's clearly not working, we'll walk away. The tendency is to throw more money at it. So the National Programme for IT, £12.7 billion, Tony Blair's idea, couldn't get cancelled by Tony Blair, couldn't get cancelled by the next Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. We had to wait for David Cameron from another political party to go, oh, do you know what? That's not working. So literally, once you've sunk so much money in it, the politicians just have to keep going. And there is no way they can just go, oh, you know what? I failed. We're right there right now at the moment in the UK. We're about to launch another single patient record programme, the like of which we've already seen fail. But they won't be able to cancel it. We'll have to wait for a change of government.
In the book, you talk about early in that new role, you travelled to India, and that's where you had that realisation. Do you want to tell us about that?
Oh, man. Yeah. My success in rolling out locally built British EPRs for mental health saw me appointed to the role of medical director of the Lorenzo delivery team. And Lorenzo was being delivered in Chennai, and they took me to a building. They took me to the multi-story building where our 2,000 devs were building Lorenzo. And I have a good friend, Darren McKenna, who'd explained Brooks Law to me. Fred Brooks, in the 1970s, wrote a book called The Collected Essays on Software Development. And Brooks Law is the more developers you have on a project, the more it will be delayed. And when I got to Chennai, we had 2,000 people developing this product. And I was just horrified. I couldn't believe how many folk we had. Successful clinical software, 4 or 5 people stood around one screen making it go. Not 2,000 people in a multi-story building. And I remember being taken to a presentation about how well everything was going. And I remember looking out the corner of my eye, I could see the elevator. There was a guy whose job it was to move the lift, push the buttons on the lift. Which floor do you want, sir? And I remember there was a guy sitting next to him on a little stool. So even the elevator guy had an assistant. I couldn't believe how much money the NHS was spending on this, where even the elevator guy had an assistant. And so did everybody else. And it was insane. And I knew it was doomed. So I phoned back to my masters in Whitehall, and they asked me, how's it going? And I replied in a text message in Dubai on the way back. I replied, it's F something UCKED. It'll never happen. And shortly after that, I got fired.
Can't believe it.
I'm glad to hear I'm not the only doctor who's read The Mythical Man Month. I got given it back in the early 2000s when I was involved in a project. It does make for exciting reading, doesn't it? And when you sort of realize complexities.
Well, you got 2,000 devs on it, and you're just going, oh, Brooks Law, God, what are we doing? And I have to say, it's one of the most useful things I've ever done, is to understand the development of clinical software is a small business. It doesn't involve 2,000 people.
Did they have any clinicians actively engaged with that group?
To be fair, I took a bunch of people out to Chennai with me just to try and bring some sanity into the process. Because originally there were no clinicians involved in the National Programme for IT. When the contracts were signed, there were no clinicians involved at all. So clinical input was an absolute afterthought. And that's largely why most of it failed. Not all of it. There were some bits and pieces we got out of it. But largely, we pissed away £12.7 billion and got very nothing.
But I'm sure the people of Chennai appreciated it.
Well, Chennai was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. But there was so much money in the project, they sent me out there business class. I'd never flown business class. I'm an NHS doctor. I'm sitting on the airplane and thinking, wow, this is the life. And the air hostess knew my name, Dr. McDonald. And I thought, my God, I'm James Bond. How much money is in this project? It was astonishing. It was lovely, but I was vaguely panic-stricken as a taxpayer that they could afford to fly me out. On Emirates, have you flown Emirates?
Nice
Business
airline.
class? It's sensational. But I couldn't believe that the NHS had flown me out there. I got out of the plane and out of the airport at Chennai and got into a tuk-tuk to take me to the Marriott. And the guy offered me a joint on the way to the hotel. And to be honest, I wish I'd had it because the drive to the hotel was so terrifying. I could have done with being stoned. And I wish I'd stayed stoned because then I'd have to see how terrible Lorenzo was.
Oh, dear. Joe, this is hilarious. Thank you. As I've said at the beginning, everyone, Joe's book is well worth a read. He's got a great way of words and very funny. Okay, Joe. Now, next topic. You wrote an open letter relatively recently to Secretary of State Wes Streeting, and it was entitled Patients Can Save the NHS. Can you tell us what your vision is for the realisation of that statement?
So the NHS is dying on its arse at the moment. It's overwhelmed, it's underfunded, and we need to make some really big changes. And I think the big changes that we need to make is that people need to be able to help themselves to healthcare, and we have to stop spoon feeding it to them in the paternalistic way that we've always done healthcare. And I think there's a genuine opportunity here for us to Netflix the NHS. Did you have Blockbuster in Australia? Well, you go down to the shop and you'd rent a video and you'd take it home. And that business model died when Netflix turned up and they were, streaming your movie instead of you having to go and collect it. And I think there's a way to do the NHS, which is around self-care, self-help, and people doing things for themselves that don't require the sort of paternalistic doctor says this, doctor says that, doing things. And people should be able to get most of their healthcare online. We have a new government and cards on table. I'm a card-carrying member of the Labour Party, but I am disappointed that my party hasn't as yet really embraced the digitisation of healthcare. Much of what we do now is done the way Hippocrates would have done it 2,500 years ago, where you've got to go and see the doctor, you've got to have it all written down, and you could be doing much of it yourself. So a great deal more self-care. I don't think you need to see the doctor nearly as much as we currently do, and people could look after themselves a great deal more. So I wrote to Wes Streeting, offered my services.
What did you ask for?
I'm waiting for him to get back to me. And obviously I'm sending him a copy of the book.
You're not going to get any argument from George or I or many of our listeners. But I think the reason that patients are not as actively engaged, we talk about putting the patient at the centre, but it's not. We invite them to meetings. We want to know what they think. But at the end of the day, healthcare is not structured around a service first, good experience model for the patient. To enable that to happen, we need to radically change the entire business model of healthcare. I would hope that if healthcare as a system was designed today, it would be vastly different, but it's not. We're building on 100-year history here, if not hundreds of years. Do you think it can be remodeled?
I know that it can because, a warning, there's a plug coming here. I worked for a company called Sleep Station. As an individual doctor, last year I treated 45,000 patients for insomnia, because that's what Sleep Station does.
Up to startup?
Yeah, we've been going a while, but what happens is if you've got insomnia, you get an account with Sleep Station, you get a username, you get a password, and we will give you cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia in the form of little video chunks, and we'll give you some coaching, and your insomnia will get better. 80% of the patients will get better. I never see any of the patients. We've automated the therapy. It's a psychological therapy that's been automated and computerized, and we can deliver it scale and at pace. And there are many other things, not just insomnia, that we could treat that way. You could fully automate the treatment of chlamydia.
Absolutely. There are a million use cases, but what you're describing, just to push back a little bit, because I'd like to get to the bones of how do we fix this, it becomes a bit of a piecemeal solution. So yeah, if you've got diabetes, go over here. If you've got chronic heart failure, go over here. That model provides good services to the people who need it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but it's still a siloed approach. If you want continual care, how do we do that rather than just pick away at it? Is there a wholesale change we can do?
Good question. We still do it like Hippocrates is doing it, where you've got to go and see an individual. One of the things that we're bound up in the UK, and I suspect in Australia as well, is we have a tradition of general practice. And I'm not sure that general practice survives AI. There you go. That's heresy from an NHS point of view, but I'm not sure the general practice model survives AI. I think the AI might be good enough to point you at the specialist service like Sleep Station or the flu jab or whatever. I'm not sure general practice gets to survive. I think general practice is a means of rationing in healthcare. Oh, Lordy, I've said it.
Okay, time for a quick break, but in a moment we'll be back with more from Joe McDonald. Joe's anthology of essays, written over a 13-year time span, track the highs, the lows, the optimism, the realities, the struggles of the digital transformation of the NHS. So when we return, we will continue to chat with Joe about some of those learnings, his thoughts on AI, data standards, the future of healthcare, and his advice for others who are passionate about changing the system for the better. Don't go anywhere.
Look, that's very interesting. So I'll start off with a disclaimer. I often claim a relationship to Hippocrates due to my Greek background, but even though I come from a totally different part of Greece.
Have you checked that out, George, on ancestry.com or something?
I really shouldn't. A couple of years ago, the NHS tried the Babylon experiment, which is obviously not part of Greece. Admittedly, the AI may not have been ready yet, and we've seen significant advances in AI, but there's this continuous debate about subspecialization versus specialization versus generalist versus AI. And obviously, the debate will continue. But I'd be interested, what did you think about Babylon? Did Babylon fail for reasons other than the AI?
I mean, what was the name of the guy, the fellow who ran Babylon? Oh, God.
Ali Parsa.
Ali Parsa, yes.
Wikipedia has him listed as the founder and CEO of the bankrupt digital healthcare company Babylon Health.
Yeah, bankrupt from the very start. I mean, it was always smoke and mirrors. I don't think there was anything useful in there. But as we all know, I mean, the AI is very different now and is quite impressive. And I think it probably point you, whatever your set of symptoms are. I mean, Google was always good at diagnosis, but you just had to know the search terms. That was the difference between the doctor and the patient, wasn't it? The doctor knew the right search terms to put into Google. But now AI could allow anybody to get reasonably good at it. So I think things are about to change. And I think the AI is way better than it used to be in the days of Babylon.
I often discuss in the podcast, I'm a big fan of open evidence, which is the LLM developed by New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA. I personally use that a lot. So I think that you're right, the AI has significantly improved. But I remember Louise was convening a conference a few years ago where we had the medical director of Babylon tell us that we're all going to lose our jobs because Babylon was going to replace us all. And of course, we ended up replacing him. So it was that was good at the end. That was a very fun dinner. I mean, Louise made the mistake of also serving wine at the dinner, which made me probably a little bit more verbose than I would have normally been at one of those events.
I mean, I confronted Ali Parsa at a meeting in London a few years ago, suggesting that his AI wasn't all that, and he wasn't very happy about it. And then I was following him as a keynote in the Philippines at a HIMSS meeting I think in Singapore, and he saw me in the front row and he near shit himself, to be honest, because he was peddling his slightly broken wares at that point, and I was about to follow him on stage, and he visibly blanched.
So back in March 2013, you called for the development of a business model where all stakeholders would fund a standard-setting organisation for health IT, which would include clinical and technical standards. 12 years later, here we are still having that same discussion. What are your thoughts on getting an agreement on standards utilisation?
You know, it's so sad. I mean, I was one of the people who wrote the business case for the Professional Record Standards Board in the UK, which is just being closed down by the government now, the PRSB. It was obvious 15, 20 years ago that we needed some sort of standard setting organisation to make things work. And it's so sad that we've, ultimately failed to set the standards required to make electronic patient records work. I was greatly encouraged by my visit to Australia last year and seeing that Sparked are having a proper go at doing the hard work to standardise stuff.
They are. It's very impressive.
It is, and I met Kate Ebrell in Melbourne, and there is no substitute for doing the hard work to standardise how we do things in healthcare. But we have singularly failed to govern the great big multi-billion-dollar corporations, and they've largely ignored standardisation. So in the UK, we've allowed the marketplace to be taken over by gigantic corporations, and it's not in their interest to make everything interoperate. So they don't. And it's very sad that we haven't been able to do that.
But are we making progress on that, do you think? Because as you say, we've got the Spark program here in Australia. There's interest in taking that Sparked model and replicating it in other places and collaborating, which is great. So I get really excited about that. But then I was in a meeting, and I won't say which jurisdiction I was in because it might be too obvious, but I was in a meeting, not necessarily in Australia, and ended up in an argument with someone. I didn't think what I said about we need standards and let's all do it this way and let's all be friends and make sure data can travel around the system. I didn't think that was a controversial thing to say. And this guy pulled me up on it and actually said, Louise, the horse is bolted on that. It's too late. And I'm like, no, it's really not. And I was pleased that the people in the meeting backed my perspective. Okay, we failed historically, but do you see, is there light at the end of the tunnel, or am I being too optimistic and naive?
There is no hope, Louise.
Oh.
There is no hope. The powers that be, you're familiar with George Stigler's work on regulatory capture. He won a Nobel Prize in the 1970s. There's a chapter in the book about regulatory capture towards the end. But the fact of the matter is that big organizations with loads of money can capture regulators and government. And in the UK, maybe different in Australia. In the UK, the government, it doesn't matter what colour the government is, whether it's red or blue, it's been captured by big time industry. And I don't see anything changing in the near future. We've got fewer and fewer IT suppliers in the UK, and we're largely governed by these large corporations. I don't see it changing. That's grim, isn't it? If you read the last page of my book, you'll understand how grim I think it is.
I have read the last page. We'll leave that out as a tease for people to pick up the book and buy a copy and flick to the last page.
No, I think it's grim. I think we're stuck with what we've got, and they've largely purchased the government, and I don't think it'll change. I think we're stuck with what we've got.
I did note that there was a company in America called Hippocratic AI who claimed that they use Hippocrates method for AI. So, yeah, put AI in the end of anything nowadays, and you got a business name out of it.
I'd say Joe spit out of his coffee, Joe. All right, let's move to our next topic then. Workforce. So like many clinical informaticians, Joe, you've been actively involved in establishing pathways for recognition of this speciality. And indeed, I read in the book as well, you called for an establishment of a Royal College of Health Informatics many years ago. So looking at where we are now, what are your thoughts on where the profession of informatics is currently? What do you think is needed to further its advancement as a recognised speciality? And then, of course, even for the people who don't want to necessarily specialise in informatics, we also need the entire workforce of healthcare delivery have various degrees of digital health knowledge and skills. And, where do they go to get that? What are your thoughts regarding that workforce uplift?
We had a good go at establishing a faculty of clinical informatics in the UK here, and briefly the government supported it with, cash money to the tune of, I don't know, £1 million. Unfortunately, one of the first things that the faculty of clinical informatics did was to write a knowledgeable report about a government program called the Federated Data Platform in the UK. And the view of the Federated Data Platform was not great. It was the Federated Garbage Platform because none of the data was standardized. And they wrote that report and immediately lost government support. So unfortunately, the FCI went bust, which is a shame. But we are probably going to try and revive that at some point. But there does need to be a professional structure for people who are, like me, interested in making the computers help with medicine. I got into this as a psychiatrist because I thought, well, if I had enough data, I could tell you what was the best treatment for first episode psychosis. And, I'm still waiting for the moment where I can access all that data and find out what's the best treatment for first episode psychosis. And there's a lot of us out there, but we do need a professional structure.
To relate to your pain, I mean, I started off as a doctor who just happened to have a computer, so therefore got tagged as the IT doctor. And I was asked to do all sorts of things, like including plug in the network cable because, hey, you know about those sort of things. You're an IT doctor. And the reality was, from a career perspective, there was no obvious career path. And I ended up working my way into IT. But 30 years later, my son graduated from medicine and the challenge still remains. Louise had a good stab at trying to professionalize clinical informatics here.
There are a number of organisations on the pitch. We never managed to organise ourselves into one group.
Yes, that's what we did. We just had one, made it much easier.
Yeah, I know. I think that's part of the problem. The FCI fiasco was just very sad. We'll have to go back. We'll have to revisit that. It has to be done.
So early in the book, you retell the story of how you learned that to tell the truth to those that didn't want to hear it was a career-limiting move. 3 months after you warned the NHS about the challenges, they fired you. Actually, you have a great turn of phrase saying that you suffer from, quote, career-limiting frankness, which, realistically, as clinicians, we're told to be very frank and honest with our patients. But obviously, when the patient is the head of the NHS, you have to have a different philosophy around it. What's your advice to others, especially the younger clinicians coming up the ranks now who are eager to change the system? How do they do that whilst keeping their job and paying their mortgage?
And not losing their mind.
Do you know, my career-limiting frankness has built me another career. So I would advise people not to be intimidated and to speak your mind if you think things are going in the wrong direction. When I interview junior doctors to join my team, I ask them a question which will put them in conflict with me. They will have to call me out and say I'm wrong. And if they don't call me out and say I'm wrong, I don't hire them. So I don't hire anybody who doesn't suffer from career-limiting frankness or honesty. I think it's really important. The health IT industry has been really damaged by people going along with stuff and not being honest about, do you know what? This sucks. I stand by my career-limiting frankness and I encourage my children, some of whom are doctors, to call it out because people die of politeness. If people aren't willing to call out, a consultant or somebody who's making a mistake, call it out. It won't kill you. Your career will go on afterwards, however devastating it might look at the time. It's best to be honest.
And Hippocrates does say first do no harm. And blowing $3 billion is definitely harm to someone.
Joe, I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and thanks for writing the book. What are you doing now with yourself? What keeps you passionate these days?
I did retire for nearly half a day. And then somebody rang up and said, would you like to be medical director of our little software house? I said, well, you don't need a full-time me. Why don't you just pay me a little retainer and I will answer your questions when you need them answered. I have a little portfolio of companies where I give advice about health IT. So I'm full of busy. It's all good. Down with retirement. It's not for good people. It's boring. I did it nearly half a day. It was dreadful.
And really, the most important question is, how do we get a copy of FHIR and Loathing in Las Vegas?
Well, go on Amazon and you will find yourself with this wonderful tome. I got ChatGPT to design the cover. I asked it for an evil politician being governed by a big corporation, and it gave me Nigel Farage.
There's no bias in those systems.
Nigel likeness for any lawyers listening. And that's all. We will put a link to your book available on Amazon in all the countries. We have over 50 countries of listeners. We will put a link to that.
All free to anybody who sends me their email address.
Okay. If you want a free copy, email the pod studio, email me. I'll put the email address in the show notes and I will send you on to Joe.
It's not about trying to make any money from the book. The idea is just to spread some thought, not to make any money.
Absolutely.
It's a great achievement. Well done, Joe, and thank you.
Louise did warn me beforehand that this would be a fun and entertaining interview. I have to agree with you, Louise. Joe, it's been a real pleasure meeting you. I look forward to the opportunity to sitting down and having a beer with you some stage and cheering the fat out.
Oh, likewise, George. I do have a son in Melbourne, so I hope to be a frequent visitor.
If you're ever down here or if I'm ever out your way, I'll let you know.
Okay, cool.
And that's a wrap on another great show. We hope you are enjoying our Amplify series. I know George and I are having heaps of fun, and we've got some fabulous guests lined up to take us into the end of the year. Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Emily Mara, co-founder and publisher extraordinaire of Pulse IT News, for her support. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Please, please, please do me a favour, do George a favour. Make sure you subscribe, follow, rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can visit Pulse IT News to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@Pulse IT News. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you want a free copy of Joe's book, email us at pulsepod@Pulse IT News and I will forward your details right on to Joe. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day.